Okay, martial arts after dark. We're talking about what changed in karate, part two. So, what happened in karate? Well, there's a couple of things that happened. Now, I'm going to go on record as having a slightly different take on things. A lot of people may not agree with me, and that's okay. I don't think, initially at least, the problem was so much how society changed. I do think what happened to karate, unfortunately, was that people who were very well intentioned and wanted to be able to fight full contact, um, hammer and tongs, under more um, comprehensive circumstances in tournaments and even to devise some sort of sport with it, they created something called kickboxing. Now, kickboxing was the promise was that you could take the best of boxing and karate and combine them. There's just a couple of problems. The first and foremost problem is that the body dynamics are totally different. You cannot really use karate like you can when you're in a boxing style. It it's not conducive to the techniques when you're doing them properly. So you had a lot of these incredibly talented fighters who were fighting full contact before kickboxing. Guys like Bill Wallace, Joe Louis, Tom LaPuppet, uh, just all over the place. Okay, Skipper Mullins. I mean, the list goes on and on. And there was sort of an idea that you could make this grow by putting pads on, okay, and making this hybrid sport, kickboxing. So what happened in kickboxing? Kickboxing, it changed the way people fight, and it took and the primacy became the boxing techniques. And there's a lot of stuff that you see. For example, there were certain leagues where you had rules. You had to throw 12 kicks around, so you'd see a guy throw his kicks really quickly to get them out of the way. I mean, it didn't work combined. You could make it work, but it took and neutered karate and made it into a sort of a boxing style that was semi good boxing and some semi good karate. Although I would argue that if you look at the guys when they were fighting full contact, whether they said it or not, in the early tournaments before kickboxing, you see a lot better karate technique. Um, but so now you had these guys, and you could put pads on. Pads also change things. People think pads are better, but pads they're there to protect your hands for the most part. They change a lot of the things that you can do. This is something that trying to get people in a lot of these MMA styles to understand that once you put a glove on your hand, okay, there's a lot of things that somebody who trains in a lot of arts, traditional, even if they fight with them, cannot do. You've really taken away a good part of their repertoire by putting gloves and used to put boots on your feet. And it just destroys how you do things. And that was one of the major things that happened with the pads. And then gradually, as things became more sport oriented and more commercialized, and this is where I agree with Saif Karman. He makes a point about um, we live in a society that has a sociological basis. He calls it white supremacy. I agree with a lot of that. Um, I don't think it's quite what people think it is. I don't think it's the supremacy of white people. I think it has more to do with a certain ruling elite who control not just minorities, but everybody, including most white people in this country. So, that's a separate discussion for another time. But this whole thing where he talks about the whole suburbanization of martial arts, and if you think about it, before even Gracie Jiu Jitsu came on the scene, You started to see karate schools popping up in strip malls. You didn't used to see that. You would see karate schools sometimes in commercial locations. A lot of the training was done in centers like Wise and recreation centers, um, people's basements. It's now people, a lot of these idiots on YouTube that talk about what they don't understand. They mock basement training. Basement training was how people trained back in the day. Boxing, every Spanish kid in my neighborhood in East Harlem had some uncle who had a heavy bag hung in a basement somewhere. Okay? Everybody had, and again, I'm going to give credit to Saif Carmen for saying these things on YouTube, but before I have come to express them to you, but people knew how to box and you knew how to fight. You had to fight. In my neighborhood, I was a minority. So if I wanted to get home in one piece, if I wanted to get my sisters home in one piece, you had to know how to fight. And boxing was how people got down back then. So when you suburbanized the martial arts, you took a lot of the edge off and you created this sort of compartmentalization that used to exist to some degree, but it became such that people were interested in fighting for social supremacy. Okay? When you study sport jujitsu, you're learning how to fight so that in a schoolyard type setting, you can have an advantage. Okay? You are getting positioned first and then executing technique. Okay? That's not really what combat is about. Combat is about, first of all, it's comprehensive. You have to have an understanding of weapons and how to use them. You have to have a comprehensive understanding of integrating weapons as well as your physical aspects with your body. You can't separate them. As a matter of fact, when I first left karate after many years, I did so because I wanted to learn about weapons. And I went to another very famous African American teacher, Ronald Duncan, one of his great students, Richard Wigington. And I studied for many years with Rick Wigington. Both of those gentlemen have passed and contributed a lot to our understanding of martial arts in the shadows. I mean, they don't get the credit they deserve. And again, there's a lot of misunderstanding and mocking and stupid things that go said about them. But the point is that because these people didn't have to deal with combat imminently, okay, they just made the art into something that could be used for social dominance. Okay, you go into a nightclub, some drunk guy pushes you, and you choke him out. Okay, now you do that in a nightclub in most parts of New York, where I grew up. 5 other guys are going to jump on your head, so you couldn't really get away with that. But if you go to your local Arby's, I guess it works out okay. You just took the edge off at this point, and really, by the time the Gracies came over here, people were ready to embrace something that was kinder and gentler, and because even jujitsu, it's the same thing. It's not just karate. Karate had certain things that were done a certain way, but the way people trained in jujitsu, it was the same thing. You look at guys like Moses Powell and all the people that were training in urban areas in jiu-jitsu. It's a similar type of situation. And then you had guys who were very good technically who came out of that, but the guys that really were from my generation and some guys after, a lot of them retained that hard edge. If you had to really break somebody's wrist, dislocate, whatever, you could do it without a second thought. It wasn't something that you had to kind of make a jump from. And you didn't try to gain position first in a long kerfuffle. I mean, basically, a martial art, when used in the street, if you fought for over about 10 seconds, you're a little behind. Okay, we'll do our final installment here. Hang on.